would you? I mean, when you look back at how the world of negotiation was looked at when you first started 30 years ago to the way we look at negotiation today, what would you see are the main differences, if there are any at all?
Well, I guess that's a good question. I think, you know, in business, negotiating has always been seen to be an important skill. From the area where I came from, procurement, um, there's been a lot of debate about where procurement sits in the business and what it's there for. I've always tended to be a little bit resistant to sort of looking at procurement as a specialism, because I feel really when we're talking about procurement and we're talking about negotiating, it's a sort of business wide thing. And I think to be a great negotiator, you need to in business anyway, you need to understand the whole business scheme and not really be a specialist in in sales, in procurement, in whatever. So it's really a generalist view that you need of the organization, because that's really because when you've got someone across the table, you've got to understand from their perspective. So, for example, if you're in procurement, it's no good being a procurement nerd. You've really got to understand what it's like to be on the sales side as well, because you've got to understand that person across the table and understand what you need to do to get them to do what you need to do. And you're not going to do that if you don't understand their position.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, has it changed much in 30 years? I'm not sure it has changed terribly, Tony, because I think at the end of the day, negotiating is about human interactions, and and that's almost eternal, isn't it?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the key thing, as ever, is that you've got to try and understand the other side. You've got to do your homework, and that probably was the same 30 years ago as it is today, to be honest.
What about the pressure that comes from your other stakeholders within in the value chain? Because I think sometimes often hear a lot with procurement that they're given a mandate, and the mandate is to save costs, and but they have competing priorities within the company, right? Because maybe sales, they don't care about saving costs, or marketing, maybe finance, yes. So when you have these competing priorities and you're given specific mandates, how do you think that a procurement specialist handle that initial negotiation, which is with their stakeholders, before they go out and actually speak to the customer?
Well, I think this comes back to my feeling that we don't want to look at procurement as too specialist, because at the end of the day, when I'm working for a business client, I'm generally engaged at board level by the managing director or possibly the operations director, and we're really looking at the overall health of the business. Now, that inevitably does, particularly in manufacturing corporations, as you can imagine, a lot of the whole revenue of the business actually gets spent in buying in parts and components to make the product. So that's probably the single biggest expenditure. And if we can't get that right, then the business is not going to survive. So I think we need to be able to focus in on that, and success in business is about the bottom line at the end of the day. It has to be sustainable. So if we're
Yeah,
thinking
yeah.
about negotiating, when I'm negotiating, I am driving a hard bargain, but I'm making sure that I'm doing a deal that I know is going to be sustainable. It's no good me twisting a supplier's arm around their back and getting what I want, and then in 12 months' time they go bust. That's not going to work. So it has to be sustainable. And the other thing that I always want to emphasize is, in terms of what we're arguing about, it's governed by the market. So what is the market price? If you're 20% above the market price, if you're like, that's not my problem, you're 20% above the market price, you need to address that. Why is that? And I suppose another thing that follows on from that is that, in terms of what I'm demanding in the negotiating, I'm only using real data. I'm not going to bluff, because that's, at the end of the day, that's not going to get us anywhere. So I do my homework. What is the market price for the product or service we're buying? Is the person across the table, at the market price or not? Now, when you've done your homework and you've really exploited the market, often the person across the table, there is some room. That's why we're negotiating.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm not just making a number up. I'm not just, if the market price is £100 or $100, that's the price we're going to be talking about. So it's about, using the market, and being authentic, and being reasonable in the negotiating. But assertive is important.